We had a crazy week 15, and with the first round of the fantasy playoffs now in the books, my prayer is that you are one of the survivors and you are on to week 16. But before we go over any kind of players you should be adding, let's recap the crazy week that was week 15. And for starters, I gotta talk about how good these quarterbacks were. We had Jared Goff go off for 5 touchdowns for 494 yards. We saw his counterpart Josh Allen, who ended up getting the win in that matchup versus the Lions with 4 total touchdowns, 2 of them on the ground, threw for 362 yards, also had a 68 rushing yards to go along with that great performance. And we saw Lamar Jackson put up a huge showing with 5 touchdowns, also passed for 290 passing yards as well as 65 yards. And we saw Aaron Rodgers put on a vintage performance, 3 touchdowns, 289 yards in the win versus the Jaguars. And speaking of the Jets, we have to talk about how good Devontae Adams as well as Mike Evans were, both of them with vintage great performances. We saw Devontae Adams with 9 receptions, 12 targets, 198 yards, 2 touchdowns, and he put up a 40 plus PPR performance for those of you that had him on fantasy. Also has had now double digit targets in 5 of his last 6 games. We also saw Mike Evans put up a showing as well with 9 receptions, 11 targets, 159 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And after this performance, we see that Mike Evans is now only 251 yards shy of that 1,000 receiving yard clip that we know the Bucs are going to work to get for him. And we also saw Amon-Ra St. Brown in that huge matchup with the Bills put up a huge performance as well. He had 14 receptions, 18 targets, 193 yards. And of course, the big thing here that we're going to go over a little bit later is how the David Montgomery situation is going to actually affect Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I actually want to quickly gloss over the impact of David Montgomery's injury and how this will actually affect Amon-Ra St. Brown. You're actually seeing volume go up for St. Brown. You're seeing an average of 9.3 receptions on 13.3 targets and 104 yards versus 79 yards that he is getting when Montgomery is there in the lineup. And one final thing I actually wanted to recap is the great Brian Thomas Jr., the rookie, showed out as expected. I called this one. I'm very proud of this call, actually. He had 10 receptions on 14 yards, had 105 receiving yards to go along with 2 tutties. He set actually career highs in receptions, targets, touchdowns, as well as fantasy points in this matchup. And it gets even better because in the next couple weeks, he's going to be facing the Las Vegas Raiders as well as the Tennessee Titans, defenses that will not worry you. And even with Mac Jones under center, this offense is going straight through Brian Thomas Jr. And I believe that with this kind of production, Brian Thomas Jr. has the makings to be a league winner as we get closer and closer to the fantasy football championships. And I'm not going to actually go over any kind of drop players at this point because right now your benches should be exclusively full of handcuffs, players that we believe that will be insurance policies. But one thing I do want to go over is some notable news. The big one coming out of Detroit that we saw with David Montgomery out for the lineup now for the Lions. This is a tough blow. We already saw that they had some tough news with their defense having a few players also out. But what I want to go over is how we expect Jahmyr Gibbs to actually now see an uptick in not only production but also on volume. We see here that Gibbs has averaged 22 points when Montgomery is out versus the 16 that he sees whenever Montgomery is in the lineup. You're seeing also here too, he averages 5 receptions versus only having 2.8 when Montgomery is there. We also see the uptick in targets go from 3.8 to 5, as well as the rushing yards go up from 66.4 to 100. And then we're also seeing the rushing attempts go up from 12 to 19. And with fantasy football matchups getting closer and closer to the championship rounds, I expect Jahmyr Gibbs with this uptick in production as well as volume that he will be a very common player that you'll see in championship rosters. And then one second thing I wanted to mention is, of course, Patrick Mahomes suffered a injury that has him currently stated as week to week. Now, Mahomes hasn't been really lighting up fantasy lineups. If you've made it this far into the fantasy season with Mahomes, it hasn't been because of him. It's been in spite of him. He's currently only averaging 16 points per game, and with Kansas City looking to turn the page with potentially Carson Wentz under center, I expect everyone on that Kansas City offense to be downgraded a little bit. I expect Worthy as well as Travis Kelce and even Noah Gray, who's been actually lining it up as of late, to see a little bit of a downgrade with Wentz under center. Okay, before we go over the waiver wire ads that you should be targeting for week 16, a lot of you aren't already subscribed, so do me a solid. If you're getting value in the video so far, hit the subscribe button as well as the like button. Let's go over the top waiver wire ads for week 16. And the first one is going to be Brenton Strange out of the Jacksonville Jaguars. The tight end for the Jags is currently only rostered in 2% of ESPN rosters, and he filled in nicely for Evan Ingram, who has now been ruled out for the rest of the season. He had 11 receptions on 12 targets for 73 yards, giving you 18.3 PPR points. And what's been great is that he is going to be facing a very juicy matchup in week 16, where he faces the Las Vegas Raiders, who actually allowed the third most points to opposing tight ends. And he's also going to be facing the Tennessee Titans in week 17, who just allowed 100 receiving yards to the tight end position when they faced Cincinnati last week. And what's very impressive is that over the past week and a half where he has been starting as the main tight end, he's actually seen a very healthy 17.8% target share, and I expect that number to increase now that we know that Evan Ingram is going to be out for the season, and we're seeing how productive he was this past week as well for the Jaguars. This next player you're going to want to target in waivers is going to be Jerome Ford, who's currently rostered in 32.4% of ESPN rosters. He had 7 attempts for 84 yards, broke off a big 64-yard game, which actually made up most of his production. He was able to score on that touchdown as well. Also had 2 receptions on 2 targets for 20 yards. But the big news here in Cleveland is that Nick Chubb unfortunately saw a injury that will silence him for the rest of the season. He broke his foot, which means that Jerome Ford will be the next running back up, and the Browns will be facing the Cincinnati Bengals in week 16. And the reason why this is important to note is because the Bengals just gave up 100 plus rushing yards to the Titans, and in the past 4 games have actually allowed 83.25 rushing yards to opposing running backs. And with Ford obviously filling in for Chubb, I believe that this matchup should be a very good one for him and makes him a borderline RB3 going into week 16. This next player you're going to want to add is going to be Jalen McMillian out of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's currently only rostered in 10.2% of ESPN rosters. He's now coming off back-to-back games with 6+ targets. He had a career high in receiving yards this past week with 75. He also had 2 touchdowns, which now gives him 3 touchdowns in the span of 2 weeks. And it gets even better because in week 16 he faces the Dallas Cowboys, who actually allow the 10th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. And also through the past 5 games, the Dallas Cowboys have allowed an average of 161 receiving yards to opposing wide receivers in this 5-game stretch. And with the Buccaneers being so effective in their passing game as of late, I believe that McMillian will be a true beneficiary to go along with the matchup that he has in week 16, making him a very good start for your fantasy matchups in week 16. This next player I want you to add is going to be Kendre Miller, running back out of the New Orleans Saints. Currently he's rostered in 8% of ESPN rosters, and what makes him really intriguing is because we saw that Alvin Kamara suffered a groin injury. Now he hasn't been ruled out, however the Saints are 5-9, so they may be very wise in being very mindful of how they want to utilize Kamara, and if he was to sit or even get limited snaps, I would expect Kendre Miller to be the true beneficiary there in that backfield. He did see 9 carries for 46 yards after stepping in for Kamara. He's now had 2 straight weeks with 9+ touches or more, and he is going to be facing the Green Bay Packers, who actually have allowed a rushing touchdown to the opposing running back position in 7 straight weeks. And during that stretch, they've actually allowed 115 rushing yards to opposing RBs, making him an RB2 if he's filling in for Alvin Kamara, and at best could be a strong flex option for you going into this week. And with the injuries that we're currently seeing at quarterback with Geno Smith as well as with Patrick Mahomes, I believe that Aaron Rodgers from the New York Jets is a really good, intriguing streaming option. Currently, he's only rostered in 43.8% of ESPN leagues. He's just coming off a 30+ point performance in fantasy this past week, but check this stat out. Through the past 7 games, he's actually thrown 13 touchdowns with only 1 interception, and he faces the Los Angeles Rams in week 16. And what's intriguing about this is that the Rams have actually allowed the 9th most points to opposing quarterbacks, and we spoke about earlier how Devontae Adams has been on a really good volume streak as far as getting double-digit targets. You combine that with the productivity that we're seeing with Aaron Rodgers, I believe that Aaron Rodgers will be a great startup for you guys in week 16, especially if you're looking to stream at the quarterback position. Hey, thank you for making it to the very end of the video. I hope you feel so much better as we get ready to go into waivers. And if you got value in this video, do me a solid, hit the subscribe button as well as the like button, and check out some of these other videos that I have here on the channel that will help you out as we get you geared up for the fantasy playoffs. Until next time, take care, God bless, peace.